war at sea during 1914 and 1918 was mainly between two great fleets, Britain's Royal Navy and Germany's Imperial Navy. The sea war encompassed the world's oceans, and it also saw the development of new naval weapons and battle tactics. Both the German and British navies each had two roles. One was to destroy the other's battle fleet, and the second was to destroy enemy merchant shipping. Both sides went to war in 1914, with both these roles given priority. In modern times, the navies tend to concentrate their fleets around the big aircraft carriers. In 1914, however, and later in 1939, it was the battleship that were the fleet's flagships. These were the largest types of warships afloat and had the biggest guns. Prior to 1914, the battleship had gone through major changes. At the turn of the century, this type of battleship had guns of different sizes. There would be 4 12-inch guns in the main turrets, with smaller caliber guns along each side. The purpose was to be able to engage all types of warship and from different angles. But as the years progressed, there were many changes, and a new way of thinking was to produce a new type of battleship which had much larger guns. This was called the Dreadnought, so called after the first British vessel which began this type. The Dreadnoughts were given 10 12-inch guns, with just a few lighter weapons for close defense. When this battleship came into service, it immediately made all other previous types obsolete. Germany, keen to build a navy as strong as Britain's, embarked on a massive shipbuilding program. Thus began the Dreadnought race. This led to ever-increasing tension between the two countries. By the outbreak of the First World War, the German Imperial Navy had 13 Dreadnought-type battleships against the British Royal Navy's 21. The German types, however, were vast improvements on the original British type. They had much larger caliber guns. They had 15-inch guns on all turrets. These guns had a range of more than 12 kilometers. This was 3 times that of the range of the pre-Dreadnought type battleships. However, during World War I, the battleship's effective range of firing was limited to the primitive capability of the optical aiming instruments and devices. Another development was these new types also had much more efficient engines, burning oil rather than coal, which gave them a much greater range. Torpedo launchers were also fitted to the new battleships. At the outbreak of war, the opposing fleets sailed to their wartime bases. For the first year, the war at sea was relatively quiet, and the new battleship saw little action. In January 1915, however, there was a serious clash in the North Sea off the Dogger Bank. Intercepting German radio signals that their battle cruisers were making ready for an assault, 5 battle cruisers of the Royal Navy intercepted and engaged 4 German battleships. One of the British ships was hit several times and badly damaged, whilst the German battleship Tirpitz had 2 of its main turrets destroyed. The Blucher was also hit, which slowed her escape. She was then attacked by 4 of the British ships. She was sunk, with nearly 800 of her crew going down with her. The following dramatic pictures show just what happens when a crew, with no time to abandon ship, go down with one of these mighty battleships. Unable to get clear in time, they are sucked down with her. In 1916, Admiral Hitler headed out to the North Sea with 5 battle cruisers, heading a fleet of 16 modern battleships, led by Admiral von Scheer. They were attempting to draw the Royal Navy out of their base in England. The two fleets engaged at a combined speed of 80 kilometers per hour. It soon became clear that the German gunnery was superior to that of the Royal Navy. This was largely due to the new stereoscopic rangefinders. 4 of the British battle cruisers were badly hit, and another blown up and sunk. British supporting battleships arrived at the scene and began to pound the German fleet. But this did not stop the German battleships. They fought back and sank yet another British battle cruiser. The battle, which became known as the Battle of Jutland, raged for 90 minutes. Both sides were engaged in heavy gunfire and complicated maneuvering of their ships. Despite the superior gunnery of the German fleet, they were heavily outnumbered, and it was this that made von Scheer decide to make an early turn. Although the Royal Navy won this battle on tactical grounds, their losses were far higher than Germany's Imperial Navy. In 1918, with the war lost, the German high seas fleet sailed into the British base at Scapa Flow in the Orkneys to surrender. The ships were impounded, but the German Imperial Navy was to deliver its final blow to the British. They scuttled the entire fleet of battleships, battle cruisers, and destroyers. When the Second World War came, the part played by sea power was not that different to the part played during the 1914-18 conflict. Its prime role remained in securing the oceans and denying them to the opposing fleets in order to ensure that maritime communications could be maintained. Thus, navies were still centered around the battle fleets, and at the outbreak of war, the battleship remained their primary vessel. In 1939, Britain's Royal Navy was still the largest in the world, with its bases all over the globe. As in 1914, it hoped to draw the German Navy into battle and destroy it. In the build-up to the war, Hitler had ordered that the German Navy be strong enough to challenge the British, and embarked on a major construction program. In contradiction to this plan, Grand Admiral Erich Raeder, the naval commander-in-chief, felt that such a plan would be hopeless, and that Germany could never match the strength of the Royal Navy on the surface. The German naval expansion program, Plan Z, therefore represented a compromise. There would be some new battleships, and also a major refit of the existing fleet. One of the first battleships to see active service was the Schleswig-Holstein, which was deployed during the Polish campaign. The aging battleship was used to bombard the port of Danzig. Schleswig-Holstein was the last of the pre-Dreadnought battleships. This 14,000-ton ship had been originally launched in 1906. One of the 5 sister ships, the Pommern, had been sunk at the Battle of Jutland in the First World War. Between the two wars, the Schleswig-Holstein had been refitted, with the 2 forward funnels being cased in one housing, and the 4 5.9-inch guns on the upper deck removed. 4 anti-aircraft guns had also been added to her structure. By the outbreak of war, the ship was considered almost obsolete, and along with her remaining sister ships, they had been relegated to training. However, the Schleswig-Holstein was deployed in the Polish campaign and was used extensively to bombard the port areas, such as here in the port of Danzig. The ship had sailed into the port with storm troops hidden below decks. During the attack, the bombardment lasted all day and continued through the night. The Polish port, which was being used as an ammunition depot, was heavily defended. Finally, after a very gallant defense, the Poles capitulated. Her task completed, the Schleswig-Holstein moved out into the Gulf of Danzig to continue bombarding other shore defenses at Oxhoft, and Hader, and Heistenest, where she was joined by her sister ship, Schleswig. This left the way clear for the troop ships to pour into Danzig. Danzig had been part of Germany until the end of the First World War, and Hitler had been determined that it should be returned to the Reich, taken by force if necessary. The attack had started on the 31st of August, and on the 2nd of September, Hitler had indicated to the Western Allies that he would withdraw from Poland, provided that he was allowed to retain Danzig and the Polish corridor. This was dismissed, and a joint ultimatum was given to Germany to withdraw her troops from Poland within 12 hours or find herself at war with Britain and France. But the bombardment had continued, and it was not until the 7th of September that the garrison of 182 Polish soldiers had finally surrendered, leaving it clear for the troops and equipment of General von Bock's Army Group North to disembark. The Scharnhorst was launched on the 3rd of October 1936. This fast and robust vessel, despite the size restrictions of Germany's fleet laid down by the Versailles Treaty, weighed 32,000 tons. Her sister ship, the Gneisenau, was launched 2 months later. These two new ships gave a new slant to the definition of a battleship by sacrificing weight of armament instead of protection and armor plating to secure high speed. The Scharnhorst had heavy anti-aircraft guns, 14 of them, coupled with 4 high-angle directors. She also had 9 11-inch guns and 12 5.9-inch guns mounted in the turrets. The Scharnhorst and the Gneisenau spent the first part of the war at sea, plaguing the merchant shipping convoys in the North Atlantic. In November 1939, they intercepted a convoy off the coast of Iceland, escorted by the armed merchant cruiser Rawalpindi. She was sunk by Scharnhorst after engaging her to enable the convoy to escape. Hans Gunther von Ahn served on the Scharnhorst. The goal of the whole business was a trade war We were not the first battleship in the Atlantic. The panzer ships, which were later renamed the Admiral Scheer and the Graf Spee, had already been active before us. The Scheer was our example, as it had been very successful, and we were ordered to carry out our attacks using the same methods. This meant to set sail and find as many convoys and merchant ships as possible, and to either destroy them or capture them and bring them back to port. Well, the British had already added armored merchant ships to their convoys as protection, and these were armed. And sometimes they were protected with battleships or cruisers. We wouldn't always risk going into battle against a ship which may have had better armament than ours. This could have had severe consequences. This would only result in us losing our ship or bringing them back battle-damaged, and this would have taken us out of the war either for good or whilst being repaired. We had many ships around us in our battle fleets, which were used for reconnaissance. We also had our aircraft. These would search the seas for the convoys, and in particular those without escorts, although sometimes the merchant ships were disguised and had hidden guns. Unfortunately, most of the ships or convoys that were sailing without escorts were ships that were not carrying any significant or important loads, or were empty. But that didn't stop us. Before we would engage and start to shoot, we would always give the convoy the opportunity to stop and surrender. We attacked the ones which hoisted the war flag or sent out Morse or radio signals for help. We did capture quite a few ships. Most times we operated independently. In fact, both the Scharnhorst and the Gneisenau acted independently of each other. But both ships came under the direct orders of the battle fleet commander. Although we were in the same fleet, we rarely came into contact, unless it was to receive new orders concerning posts or reconnaissance areas. During the campaign in the Atlantic, we were at sea for 9 weeks. On the 7th of April 1940, Britain's Royal Air Force spotted German merchant ships steaming north towards Norway. They were headed for the ports of Narvik and Trondheim. Each of the ships, disguised as coal ships, were packed with stormtroopers and assault troops. Germany was about to invade Norway. Amongst the fleet were 2 of Germany's capital ships, the battleships Scharnhorst and Gneisenau. There was also 2/3 of Germany's U-boat fleet, deployed to protect the troop ships. Although being spotted by the RAF, fog and low cloud had helped to mask the ships, and although the British home fleet had been alerted, they were slow to respond to the possible threat. The convoys reached their destinations relatively unhindered, although one of the merchant ships had been sunk by a Polish submarine. One British destroyer, which had also managed to intercept the fleet, was rammed by the German cruiser Hipper, which sent her to the bottom of the North Sea. German seaborne troops made 5 separate landings in Norway, at Oslo, Kristiansand, Bergen, Trondheim and Narvik, whilst airborne troops seized the airfield at Stavanger. All of the German objectives were taken with relatively little resistance from the Norwegians. However, by the time of the invasion on the 9th of April, the British home fleet had almost caught up with the German fleet. And whilst the troops were being landed safely, there were soon to be ferocious battles going on at sea. Both German and British losses were going to be heavy. We were on the occupation of Norway, which took place in April 1940. Normally, we would hear rumors which would spread over the ship before any orders came. But this time, most of us were taken completely by surprise when the order was given. We just set sail all of a sudden with hardly any warning given. all of the ships were fully loaded, and we had a fleet of destroyers with us. These destroyers were packed full of ammunition, lancers, and equipment. We sailed up the coast of Norway, and then en route we were told that our destination was to be Narvik. Our job was to travel with the destroyers to the port, protect them whilst they went in and the troops disembarked and all of the ammunition and equipment was unloaded, and then protect them on the way out again. The journey up was pretty rough. There was a gale blowing and the seas were running high. It was worse for the destroyers. It got so rough at one point that equipment was falling overboard. And not just equipment. Some men went overboard as well. It was that rough. Well, we finally took the destroyers in to Narvik, and they unloaded. Whilst we were waiting for them to come back out, we were attacked. It was early morning and still dark, and the British fleet had caught up with us. The battleship Renown, we fought with her for about 2 hours. The Gneisenau was also involved. We managed to get away and sailed towards our destroyers as we had to get them out safely. However, we heard that it would no longer be necessary as the British had caught them on the way out, and they were all lost. The missions we were on during the Norwegian campaign, and I did 5 more of these, usually lasted about a week. Sometimes they would last 3 weeks, and the longest one we did lasted for 9 weeks, which is a long time on the Atlantic. We sailed 18,000 nautical miles. Life on board could be difficult at times, but being seamen, we were used to living in small, cramped spaces, and we were perhaps better off being on a big battleship rather than on one of the smaller ships. Most Germans like to eat potatoes, and it's funny, but that's what I missed most of all. Of course, it would have been impossible to carry enough potatoes on board to last 2,000 men for 9 weeks. There would have been no room left for anything else. We had a good crew, and the officers and rankings were all very fair. Of course, we always moaned about the boss, but without someone in charge, it is impossible to run a ship. There was never any question when orders were given. You just carried on your duty. But quite often the job was not easy. At sea, there would always be what we called a war guard. There was a war guard for both cruise stations and the guns where I was. A starboard guard and a backboard guard. There would also always be a guard on duty guarding the ammunition and machines. We all joined in with this duty and took turns on a rota. On some occasions, we were all on duty all of the time, so there was little time for recreation or resting. I also remember when I was on guard duty, I would have to eat my meals at my post. Sometimes this war guard would be halved. Then there were only 4 of us, so we could take shorter duties and have time to rest. This was usually when the weather was good and we could see more. There was also a night guard on the guns. This was usually the middle gunners, and during the daytime the heavy gunners. This ensured that we had our guns manned and operational 24 hours a day and could act immediately. The worst time for us was when we were out in the North Sea, out in the real cold, icy conditions. The cold made everything difficult, and the conditions were hard. It wasn't the same for the rest of the crew on board, because when the ship was cruising, there was heating, except for the towers where we were. They had nothing. We used to borrow electrical heaters from wherever we could find them, but this was not possible out on the rough sea. so we usually ended up standing for hours on duty in freezing cold. This type of work is no piece of cake, let me assure you. When the conditions got really cold, in the far northern areas of the Atlantic, the sea would of course freeze over, making it extremely difficult to cross, especially for the lighter vessels or U-boats and convoy. These would become sitting targets for enemy bombers. In such conditions, the heavy battleships, mainly the older ones, or the ones that had been taken out of active service, such as the Schleswig-Holstein after the Polish campaign, would be used not only to protect the convoys, but also as icebreakers. Her sister ship, the Schleswig, also acted in this role on many occasions. In June 1940, the Scharnhorst and the Gneisenau were sent north with an order to carry out an attack in the north of Norway. The Norwegian campaign was drawing to a close. With the evacuation of Allied troops from Narvik, Germany now had a strong foothold on the whole country. The German fleet were intending to intercept the ships carrying the retreating Allied forces. The British Home Fleet had deployed some of its capital ships to the area for protection, including the aircraft carrier HMS Glorious. The Scharnhorst and the Gneisenau spotted the smoke cloud from the Glorious at a distance of about 30 kilometers away. Accompanying the carrier were British destroyers. The two German battleships moved in to engage the British. From a distance of 29 kilometers, the Scharnhorst opened fire. The German gunnery was efficient and effective, and within minutes the Glorious took a direct hit. She started to burn, which meant that she could no longer launch her aircraft. The two destroyers accompanying the carrier moved in close to protect her and opened fire on the German ships. The distance between the opposing forces was by now closing. As the Glorious began to sink, the two destroyers fought a fierce battle. However, the first one was soon sunk. The second one, the Ardent, moved up to launch a torpedo attack on the Scharnhorst. The Ardent was hit and sunk, but not before letting loose the 4 torpedoes. The Scharnhorst took a direct hit on the starboard side. gouging a hole 4 meters by 10 meters under one of the main towers.
Das Schiff hatte einen großen Schaden. Die Steuerbordwelle war durchgebrochen.
The ship was severely damaged. We didn't know quite how much until later, but we did know it was serious. The middle engine had been damaged and flooded, and the turbine was no longer working. Fortunately, we did manage to get to Trondheim with just one engine, but we could hear the main shaft knocking loudly, and we only just made it. Following a period of repair at Brest, the Scharnhorst and the Gneisenau, along with the Prinz Eugen and accompanying destroyers, were to make one of the most dramatic breakouts of the war. They boldly sailed at full speed through the English Channel. After the ship had been in Brest for repairs, we had new orders. The trade war in the Atlantic was becoming increasingly difficult, and whilst we were holed up in Brest, we knew that we were in range of the British bombers, and they knew we were there. It was necessary for the whole fleet to break out before we were attacked. There were 3 options open to us as we could see it. We could either sail to the Mediterranean, going via Denmark, or we could try and sail up past Norway, back to the safety of the Bay of Germany. Or we could dash out through the English Channel, and this seemed the best option. The British, however, were expecting this, and did everything they could to make the channel impassable. However, we took the chance, and much to the disbelief of the British, we made a dash from the harbour. There was an attack from the bombers, but it was a cloudy night, and they were not successful in stopping us. Somehow we were just very lucky. And it was not until we got to the most narrow point in the channel at Dover-Calais that we were spotted again. They attacked us with their land battery. But this was no good, as we were just out of range of their guns. Then the aircraft arrived. All around us, the Scharnhorst, the Gneisenau, Prinz Eugen, and our destroyers and torpedo aircraft, we were all shooting like mad. The British also sent some torpedo aircraft. These approached us very bravely and made a gallant effort to attack us. But they were too slow. They didn't get a chance to fire one torpedo. We shot down every one of them with our anti-aircraft batteries. By this time, luck was once again on our side. The Luftwaffe arrived and kept the British fighters and bombers busy, and shot down many of the RAF aircraft. All of our ships managed to break out of the channel undamaged. The Scharnhorst continued for the next 2 years plaguing Allied shipping, but in December 1944, her end was in sight. During the Battle of North Cape, she was engaged and sunk by British cruisers. Only 36 of her crew survived. On February the 14th, 1939, the massive hull of an unfinished German warship slid into the water at Hamburg. The Bismarck. For the Nazi Party, this was a day to celebrate the new might of German war power. A moment that was enjoyed by the Führer himself. In his speech he said, "German builders, engineers and workers have created this mighty hull of this proud giant of the sea. May the German soldiers and officers who have the honor of utilizing this ship always prove worthy of its namesake." With this fervent wish, the German people welcomed their new battleship, Bismarck, as it slowly glided into its new environment of the sea. This was to be one of the strongest, largest, most powerful and most modern battleships of all the world's navies. However, the legend of the Bismarck is one that spans a mere 277 days. Only 277 days from its launching to its sinking. Its one and only operation lasted no more than 215 hours. And yet, the giant Bismarck was responsible for one of the most gripping dramas to take place at sea during World War II. During that short span of time, it was the most powerful battleship in the world. On board was the most up-to-date and most superior technology available. Its massive array of weapons and the extremely high level of its crew's training made this ship a seemingly invincible war machine. The sea power of the Bismarck now stood between Germany and victory, and no navy in the world had ever engaged an enemy warship like her. Willie Chinese served on the Bismarck from her first day to her last. Just before the summer of 1940, I was ordered to the battleship Bismarck. We spent the next few weeks getting to know the ship inside out, learning where everything was and how the ship ran. Next, we were allocated to our positions. I was ordered to join the 15-inch artillery, the middle artillery, and I was trained how to use the guns and how to work the ammunition chamber and all aspects of this station. And then we set sail. We were ordered to run a series of tests and trials for the new ship in the Baltic Sea. Our job was checking the guns, calibration, and firing with blanks. With practice and getting to know the guns, we managed to achieve a salvo rate 1 round every 6 seconds. Considering the size of our heavy artillery, this was pretty good. We did the test runs in the Baltic Sea in 2 separate runs. The Baltic Sea is extremely tricky when it is windy. Many of us experienced this, and we had to pay for it. Anybody who has served on a ship in these seas will know what I mean by paying for it. As already mentioned, we did 2 sea trials in the Baltic Sea. The first trial was when Bloom and Voss, the builders, handed the ship over to us, and the second trial finished in May.
After
the second trial had taken place in the Baltic, we had a visitor on board, Herr Hitler. We all knew then that very soon we would be going on a mission. And we were right. On the night of the 19th of May, we set sail towards Kiel and then to Denmark.
In Richtung Kiel und dann umschwenken nach Dänemark.
The British had been waiting for the Bismarck to make its move, and as the mighty battleship slid past the coastline of Norway, she was spotted. A signal was transmitted to the Admiralty building in London. A Royal Air Force reconnaissance aircraft was sent to confirm the sighting. The aerial photographs were sent back to London, and the sighting was confirmed. It was definitely the Bismarck. She was lying at anchor, hidden in deep fog in a fjord.
Und sind dann ausgelaufen.
Nobody on board knew that we had been spotted by the Royal Air Force, and consequently we were unaware that Britain knew we were coming.
Air Force, und die Meldung war schon lange in England, wie wir ausgelaufen sind. Wir liefen dann in Dänemark.
We sailed into the Denmark Strait on the
und,
22nd,
haben dann am
and this was when we had the first encounter with two British cruisers.
22. die erste Verbindung gekriegt mit englischen Kreuzer.
Und da sind nachher zwei
All of a
englische
sudden, these
Kreuzer
two
aufgetaucht.
British cruisers came out of the fog. We were given permission to open fire, but then the two cruisers disappeared again into the fog,
Was festgestellt wurde,
so we couldn't see them to hit them with our guns.
von ihren Kreuzer.
The British also had radar,
Von uns,
just as we did.
von uns, von der Flottenführung
And here, the commander of our fleet made a
gemacht
mistake.
worden.
He assumed that the cruisers hadn't seen us
Haben
visually,
wir glaubt,
and that although their radar beams might have hit our ship,
aber stimmte nicht.
they did not reflect back to the British cruisers, as this type of radar was ineffective at this time.
Waren nicht vorhanden. Also haben die Engländer auch nicht.
This belief, however, was incorrect. The British cruisers Suffolk and Norfolk had seen the Bismarck. They already knew her whereabouts from the previous signal. The new position was transmitted back to London. The British knew they had to stop the Bismarck before she had a chance to meet up with the battleships Scharnhorst and Gneisenau. As Bismarck continued, a message was sent to the battleship Hood, giving them coordinates and orders to intercept and engage the Bismarck. The Hood at this time was Britain's capital ship and most closely comparable to Bismarck. Although aging, she was still the most powerful ship in the Royal Navy and was considered to be a worthy adversary of the Bismarck. The two ships closed fast on each other and prepared to do battle. Unbelievably, within just a few minutes, the Hood took a direct hit. She exploded and sank within seconds. There were hardly any survivors. The news of the sinking of the Hood was devastating to the British people. There was public outrage and demands for revenge. Churchill gave the order: find the Bismarck and sink her. Sink her at any cost. The signals were sent out to the British fleet at sea and to the Royal Air Force. There was to be an all-out directive to find the Bismarck. Meanwhile, the Bismarck, along with the heavy cruiser Prince Eugen, steamed north and then west through Danish waters.
Wir selber hatten 3 Treffer.
Well, we had taken 3 hits against the Hood. One in the engine room, one in the front of the ship, and one in the launch
Wir sind
position.
dann weitergelaufen.
One of the crew had died in the battle. We sailed a bit further, and then it was decided that the Prince Eugen should carry on towards Greenland, and we, the Bismarck, would try to make a dash to Brest for repairs. The problem we had was that the welded seam between the backboard and the second boiler room was seriously damaged and water was coming in. We were all on the alert and were kept very busy. When water comes into a ship, as you can imagine, this is the worst that can happen. People start to panic. Later, after this, things started to settle down, and we went back to our normal combat posts, and the ship steamed on. But for the British, the hunt was on. The Bismarck was not going to escape. Catalinas took off to join in the search. Somewhere in the dense cloud and fog, they knew the Bismarck was steaming at full power to reach a safe haven. Somewhere between Greenland and the coast of France, Britain's fleet was ready. The British were full of anger and longing for revenge, but they still lacked the target. As the Catalina scoured the ocean, there came a break in the clouds. A telltale wake of a ship was spotted. As the ship came into view, the signal was flashed back to the fleet. The target had been sighted. They had found the Bismarck again. The ship's navigator sprang to life. The position was plotted. Britain closed in for the kill. The carriers Victorious and Ark Royal were deployed. Their swordfish were armed with torpedoes. The Bismarck was not going to be allowed to escape again. The biplanes took off on the decks of the carriers. They launched an assault on the Bismarck. On the 26th in the evening, we were attacked for the first time by the British Swordfish, the torpedo aircraft. Later in the night, a second attack came, and this time they were more successful. We got hit. We had tried to evade the aircraft and torpedoes, but on this time we took a hit in the rudder. It was badly damaged. It was bent about 12 degrees, and after this we could only sail about 8 miles straight with the help of the engines working against the rudder. We were helpless. We must have been about 6 hours ahead of the British fleet, but because we could not escape, only go in large circles, they caught up with us. At about 6 a.m., they caught us. We tried to accelerate away, but it was useless. We could only travel in a circle, about a 12-degree radius. It wasn't long before we all realized that we had become a sitting target for the British fleet.
Ein Zielschiff der englischen Flotte wurde.
The British fleet, with the Dorsetshire, King George V, and the Rodney, closed in on the crippled Bismarck and opened fire. For 1 full hour, the relentless British salvos continued. We took 2 direct hits on the front of the ship. The tower crew came up top and warned us to get away as quickly as possible, as the tower was about to explode at any minute. The ship's guard sounded the order for the crew to retreat. We ran back to the part of the ship where our quarters were. We were below deck. There was panic everywhere. The crew from the operating rooms, the ones that manned the boilers and turbines, had been given the signal Measure V. The V meant versunken, sinking. We had 15 minutes to abandon ship. I tried to open the hatchway. This was impossible because the flax had fallen on top of it. I shouted out for someone above to try and move them, which luckily somebody did hear, and they were moved. I let the other comrades out first and made sure the room was clear. Then there was another direct hit on the deck. We lost so many men, and many more were badly injured. Then I managed to get to the backboard side. This was a mistake on my part. The water was pouring in. I had to pull myself up higher out of the water and get to the next level up the ship. You cannot imagine or believe what I saw. I was on the deck in front of the Caesar Tower. There were at least 50, probably more like 100 dead bodies. You just cannot imagine such a sight. The mighty Bismarck was finished. Bill Braddon, an officer on the British ship Dorsetshire, witnessed the Bismarck's last minutes. It was all over. The greatest and finest battleship ever built had gone down. Not in disgrace, but in a blaze of glory. She fought like a tiger right to the last minute. There was no cheering on our ship. It was a terrible sight. Her crew who had faced death with bravery now faced death in the tempestuous sea. Although it was May, the water was freezing. The sailors were too cold and weak to hold onto our ropes as we tried to save them. We had to stop. A U-boat had been spotted. The ship trembled as we pulled through the water. If we had waited just a bit longer, we could have saved so many more. We threw overboard anything that could float. There were several hundred men, and we had to leave those poor devils behind. All of us, even our captain, cried with frustration. In all, 111 men from the Bismarck were saved, but almost 2,000, including all of her officers, had perished. 2 months after the Bismarck had been launched, her sister ship, the Tirpitz, had rolled down the slipway. She had been deployed to Norway in 1942. The numerous fjords gave her plenty of relatively safe anchorages. In September 1943, British midget submarines known as X-craft had managed to get into her fjord and damage the Tirpitz. In April 1944, British carrier-borne aircraft launched an attack on her. Once again she was damaged, but once again, not significantly. Finally, during the autumn of 1944, 2 of Bomber Command's crack squadrons attacked the Tirpitz on 3 separate raids. On the 12th of November 1944, they damaged her so severely that she capsized. The last of Germany's big battleships had met her end.